naked. I told you it would come to this. I was right. The Jedi are taking over!
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your geographic location. I am Mr. Patriarch. Thank you very much for joining me today on a Monday, the Juneteenth. Happy to have you guys here. If you're new to the channel, thank you for checking it out. I see we already have somebody who has not caught a live stream before. Yes. From Artillery Aficionado, first time catching Mr. Patriarch chat live. Very good. Happy to have you here, bud. Yes, so apologies for last stream. I accidentally clicked the yes, it's meant for children button, and as a result, the chat shut down. So apologies for that. That has been remedied for this stream. If you want to support the channel, links to PayPal or Subscribestar can be found below. It helps out, helps cover the bills around here and my growing vital family. So that is that. If you have any comments that you'd like to leave, something I left off, you can do so in the comment section. Please be sure to give the video a like. It helps out with the algorithm. And I would like to quickly thank the backers of the show. So let me go here, share screen. I'm going to go to a window here. There we are. So I would like to quickly thank buddies of the show, Aristoteles, Hominid Ape, longtime backer of the show, who sent me a very kind message on the stream where I talked about family and relationships. He is apparently he took sort of what he learned from the show and got himself a French waifu. So very happy for him. Holophonist, Nevermore Night, Skeptical Waves, curator of tremendous dissident right texts, prudentialist, good friend of the show, and JNS 77. Symbols, and Burnham's Ghost, perhaps the longest supporting member of the channel. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for your service. We appreciate it. Now, let us sort of set the stage. Oh, and quick shout outs for my buddies, Prudentialist, Charlemagne, Distributist, Arnold McIntyre, and others. There's going to be the Shieldings event, I believe, in Tennessee next weekend. And that sounds like a really, really awesome event. I'd love to attend myself. Unfortunately, finances do not allow that for this season, but perhaps next year. I would really like to attend. So if you're going to the Shieldings event and you have the wherewithal to do so, I'd highly recommend attending if you can. So for me, up here in the Great White North, it's a little harder to get down there, but it sounds like a great time. So without further ado, let us begin. Now that all the housekeeping is out of the way, let's set the stage. So first off, rape culture. What is it? It was sort of the cause celeb along with other feminist arguments, talking points about a decade ago. So if I think back to my own time, when I was finishing up my undergrad and even afterwards, people like Sargon and whatnot got their start attacking feminism and sort of becoming the anti-SJW YouTube crowd. Now, distributist David Green has a cool episode that he did, I don't know, maybe a year ago at this point, which was on the different stages of YouTube. And the first stage, I think, was sort of viral videos. Second stage was atheist videos, when new atheism was hot. And then the pivot after that was anti-SJWs. which was the kind of where we're starting our conversation today. So anti-SJWs were primarily, young Zoomers might not know this, but were targeted actually against feminists by and large. So SJW talking points were about a decade ago, were not primarily focused on race. They were not primarily focused on LGBT stuff for the most part. They were primarily focused on feminism and feminist talking points and reacting to those and addressing them. So prior to the Trump administration, this was the cause celeb a decade ago. It was not LGBT, again, by and large, on YouTube at least. There was definitely some pushing for what could be called gay rights and the some race stuff as well. So in the second administration of Barack Obama, you had the Trayvon Martin case, and then you had the George Zimmerman case. You had some racially charged issues, but it was not nearly to the fever pitch that we've seen since the Trump admin. Most of the woke talking points, if you want to call them that, were primarily centered around feminism and feminist talking points. And this actually made its way into law. So there were amendments made to Title IX, which is basically as I recall, an amendment to the Civil Rights Act, which precluded discrimination against women. And the idea was to get equity in women's sports. And this was, I believe, in 2012. The White House actually had a gathering for such brokering, I guess, in terms of pushing women's sports and also making amendments to or setting down guidelines for universities in regards to sexual activities happening on campus, to cut down on quote unquote a rape culture and the taking advantage of women and how any situation where you have a female who has a sexual encounter with a man and maybe she was a little drunk at the time and then she regrets it later, well, now that's rape. And this was kind of the hot culture war issue at the time, which we have since moved well beyond in the following decade. Now, as I've said, rape culture and feminist issues was the cause celeb a decade ago. This is where you got such characters as Anita Sarkeesian, right? Sargon's original arch nemesis, mattress girl, complaining about rape culture on campus. And also, this is when Gamergate kicked off, at least a little bit later. And Gamergate, of course, was an effort to have ethics in video games journalism, as I'm sure millennials will remember and Gen Z might know from the memes. But this was the hot cultural war issue at the time, which in retrospect seems tame to sort of what we're dealing with today. The whole emphasis was on what you might call third wave or hyperfeminism during the Obama era. This was kind of the first salvo of the first intense salvo during the culture war during the Obama administration, his second administration. Around that time, you did have some racial issues, like I said, with Trayvon Martin George Zimmerman, etc. But this was not, these were kind of, at least in terms of the zeitgeist on YouTube, isolated events which did not get the sort of sustained traction that you had with feminism. And, talkings about rape culture and dunking on SJWs. SJWs, again, at the time seemed, and as I remember well, seemed to be largely focused and hinged on feminist issues, hyper-feminist issues. So the main people at the time in the crosshairs were the patriarchy, TM, and males, right? Trans individuals were not discussed at all within the dialogue. This was a war of the sexes in terms of what was, the contention, the sort of political dialectic happening at the time was a war of the sexes between women who wished to be liberated from the male gaze and, male sexual advances and interactions that women might feel bad about and then retroactively label as, sexual assault. This was a way for the civil rights cult fundamentally to get power, I'm convinced, in retrospect. So again, with Title IX, the idea was that, we would have equality for women legally. There would be added additional protections for women on campus. Men were sort of seen as the enemy, and you had this dichotomy between men and women within YouTube at the time. And this was, I think now, kind of the narrow edge of the wedge in terms of facilitating the first steps of the hot culture war, which we're now dealing with. Now, of course, these things had been going on in the background before. I'm not going to pretend like this is anything new or that the cause of feminism or civil rights is something that we're just dealing with post-90s. It is certainly not. However, most of these things were being litigated in the background. They were not popular cultural issues by and large. You did have racial issues, of course, but mostly those were concentrated in urban areas. And while they would be hot button issues, they seem to be largely focused on certain localities. So racial justice might be really hot in, let's say Los Angeles, but if you lived in Montana, it wasn't really something to get fired up about simply because there was no diversity in your area. But the feminist movement of, the early 2010s really was kind of a shift of the zeitgeist and a way by which this, the cult of civil rights could sort of impact itself upon the public consciousness in a very forceful, universalizing way, which I do not believe had been done before all that much. So it was kind of a new cultural phenomenon. It became cool to be a feminist. It became cool to dunk on feminists. And you had this dialectic between the anti-SJWs and the feminist camp. And rape culture was one of their issues. And so for those who are unfamiliar with the term rape culture, basically what it means is the, using the feminist frequency, I guess, definition of it is basically the cultural norms and mores of a society which facilitate men thinking it's okay to take sexual advantage of women, right? And this is rape culture. So, and this was a hot issue. Like if you're in university, a decade ago, or yeah, I guess the decade ago, or right around a decade ago, this was the hot shit. This was the stuff that you'd hear in your classroom. This was the social justice cause that got people fired up. And I remember in my undergrad, I guess, yeah, this was exactly around this time when this was kicking off. Now, keep in mind, I did not go to a particularly progressive university, but even still, I encountered these people. And a couple of times we'd have discussions, debates in class, and I'd sort of pull out my Thomas Sowell talking points about women in the workforce and how wage inequality, and that was another big thing, of course, was wage inequality between men and women. And I just point out simple facts and stats and how women's choices largely affect their income outcomes over the course of their lives. And of course, I got people I brought this up to were very angry, and so on and so forth. But there was a pivot, a noted pivot, which is kind of why I wanted to bring this up, because as you all know, nobody talks about rape culture anymore. Nobody really talks about the gender wage gap, right? That's what it was called. And, that there's a lot of problems with the term gender nowadays, obviously. But after 2013, you began to see a little bit of a change in this. So this was, of course, the year where gay marriage, so-called, became legal nationwide and enforced by the Supreme Court edict. And there was a change in the emphasis of social justice. So prior to this, I remember in high school you had GSA, the Gay Straight Alliance, which was becoming a popular thing. And even in my, one of the high schools I attended, I noticed this was sort of kicking off. And at the time, it was fairly normal for people to sort of look askance at gay marriage, like among the youth, high schoolers. And you could have fairly open dialogue or disagreement with this concept, which I think would probably be unthinkable now, unless you lived in a particularly red area of a state, you lived in a particularly red area of a red state with a, fairly sympathetic school district with conservative teachers. They might tolerate that sort of talk, but by and large, not. So what ended up happening, I think, in retrospect, and this is kind of why I wanted to do this video, was to basically understand why the pivot happened and how these political footballs get, created and then thrown around for the sake of power. So after 2013, of course, you have like I said, the success, if you want to call it that, of the Obergefell decision, where gay marriage became the law of the land in the United States. And then GSA, becoming more popular in schools, and the emphasis began to slowly shift away from feminist issues to gay issues. And then from gay issues to more, let's say, exotic sexual and identitarian themes. Now, I do think that part of the reason why rape culture began to take a back seat had to do with the first Trump administration, and mostly the campaign, the lead up to it from 2015 to 2016. That was when feminist issues actually began to wane in terms of popularity. And I think a lot of this had to do with the online discourse between, the alt-right 1.0 the alt-right 1.0 sort of engaging with feminist arguments. So, for the sake of my YouTube channel, I'll be vague. But basically, the situation there was, the alt-right would engage with these feminists and say, yeah, let's talk about rape culture, actually. And you know who commits most of the rape? I'll let you decide or fill in the blanks on sort of what they would say. Then it became mostly about demographics and rape is a real problem. And let's talk about who is doing the rape. There is a rape culture, as a matter of fact. This would be some of the alt-right 1.0 trolling that was going on. And, you have Rotherham in the UK, you have Germany, the all refugees welcome thing. And then very quickly, there had to be a pivot in terms of the agitprop of the woke crowd, right? So now talking about rape was an uncomfortable thing because whenever you did, you would inevitably be confronted with a Pepe Anon account who would start bringing up statistics on different groups and their proclivity for sexual assault, right? And then the cause, of course, became one of racial justice. That was sort of the big pivot. We went away from rape culture, the male gaze, patriarchy, to racial justice and minorities. And the sexual libertinism was sort of elevated, right? So then you end up having different characters within the SJW space talking about sex, sort of separated from the dynamic between men and women. And now it could be the sexual relationships between, the transgendered or homosexuals. And that was sort of where all the energy went. And I have this weird situation where people like Anita Sarkeesian or Lacey Green or whatever are kind of dinosaurs. Like they don't really have a place in the discourse around social justice, in much the same way that the new atheists were kind of left in the dust. So what is the purpose of all this agitprop from the feminists with rape culture, and then moving on to other groups? All refugees welcome, love is love, to trans rights. The purpose is power, unlimited power, right? So that's basically it. So you have a situation where these wedge issues are weaponized by activist groups for the purposes of power. And this serves not only them, the narrow interest group, but also the state. So the state tremendously benefits in terms of power acquisition from this culture wars dialectic. And you end up with characters who sort of embody the dark triad of personality, right? So if you look at, and this was true of the, early feminists and then the LGBT stuff, and then now the T stuff and the migrants, where you have the dark triad of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. So the emphasis, so if we go first to the narcissism angle, there's an emphasis on focus on self and the community, in quotes, right? Regardless of whether it is, whether it's a sexual minority, a racial minority, or women or whatever, even though women aren't really a minority, but feminists frame themselves as that. There's a certain grandiosity and sort of perceived superiority, like we're the ethical ones. We are sort of on the cutting edge of civil rights. And then, of course, there's an entitlement aspect to this. We need more Gibbs. We need more protection. We need more laws. We need more resources. We need more make-work jobs and deals with Netflix, right? And then there's a Machiavellianism. So they're inherently manipulative. They're trying to engineer public opinion and sort of, as Yarvin would say, manipulate procedural outcomes. That is the big thing these people are engaged with. Self-interested, again, with the Machiavellianism. It's clearly obvious. Like, these people are not interested in the health of the society or the wider group, or the wider nation, or even their local community. It's basically their niche identitarian group. The feminists demand X. Black people demand X. LGBT demands X. And then domineering, right? So they wished, and this is so obvious if you engage with these people, they want to have a situation where the state power is either within their hands or directed by their hands to impose their vision of society on the rest of us, on the deplorables, on, traditional Christians, or even Muslims. You're seeing this now, where you're having a bit of a buyer's remorse in Canada or the UK vis-a-vis the large amount of Muslim immigrants they've brought in, who do not see eye to eye with their domineering, self-interested cultural imperatives, right? And so the solution to this is either to get them to kowtow, or, like that Canadian teacher said to the Muslim students, just leave. You don't belong here. And the psychopathy thing, the impulsive, cold, remorseless. I mean, they really don't care about the chuds at all. I mean, this is entirely obvious. Emotionally cold to any sort of well-intentioned, good faith reservations or disagreements. The Amish can't be allowed to exist in their Anabaptist, Germanophile cultural bubble. Like, these are people who must be crushed, essentially. And likewise with other Christians, right? Or Muslims in the case that I brought up earlier. So the purpose is power. These activists embody sort of a dark triad type of personality disorder. And the dialectic between the right and the left has sort of kind of helped the pivot in terms of priority that these people tend to, advocate. So, like I said, you had sort of the issue, again, going back with the feminism, which we're dealing with men and women. Everybody acknowledges men and women. Most people, rightly or wrongly, will acknowledge that women were done dirty in the past. And so therefore there needs to be justice. Therefore there needs to be further power invested in the state to protect women. And then when the problems come up with this, with the talk about rape culture, then you end up having the alt-right sort of engage with feminists to sort of poke holes in this narrative, which is very embarrassing for them, because now they have to, if they want to be consistent with their own ideology, now they have to, point the finger at the groups most likely to perpetrate these, injustices, let us say. And then so naturally, in order to maintain power or prestige within the system, they have to sort of pivot to the next thing, which is now racial justice, minority rights, and then continuing on to other more and more extreme or bizarre, marginal sexual groups, let us say. And the result of this is that you end up having a total, a more and more totalizing vision for what society needs to look like, facilitated by state power at the behest of these sort of marginal groups. And the state power, of course, is very happy in our liberal world order to take on these issues, to take more authority onto itself, and to impose more and more into the lives of ordinary people. Now, there's a really good talk about the different types or taxonomies of leftists. I think it was the most recent Distributist Stream podcast, where he's kind of talking about this stuff. And the different camps of the left, you end up having the true believers, the ultimate, like, liberation at all costs, right? The people who really drink the Kool-Aid. And they've always been kind of the, I guess, the drivers of these things. But connected to them, you also have another group who are the pick-me's, the people who want jobs and status within the current paradigm, who aren't particularly ideological. And you also have grifters, who make up a third group. And whatever the cause celeb of the true believers starts out with, they will find allies among the people who want, the jobs and the gibs and the status. And then the grifters will, of course, glom on to this and help push it along. So you have this unholy trifecta of these three groups sort of pushing and agitating to sort of make the social change happen. And the fourth group, you end up having the sort of centrist, quote unquote, libs who are just like, yeah, the system's fundamentally good, but it's a slow march for progress, but we're going to get there eventually. And these people end up absorbing the culture and values of the first three groups through normalization, as it becomes normalized throughout society, which is why we end up having the situation where we do. And fundamentally, the drive of the true believers is libertinism. The sex-positive feminism, the LGBT identity, the sexual expressiveness. And, I'm going to be careful here because I don't want my YouTube channel to be nuked, but what you're seeing increasingly, and this was clear in queer theory early on, with if you want to start with Michel Foucault and sort of going forward, the idea that children are fair game, right? Or that they should be. And how do you square that element of the sexual liberation movement with on the one hand, with a feminist movement on the other, which decries rape culture, right? These two are obviously at odds. So for the sake of sexual gratification and liberation, one of these groups has to take the back seat And obviously, it's going to have to be the feminists, right? So again, the sort of lacy green. I wonder if she even has a channel anymore, Lacy Green, but the sort of lacy green, sex positive feminism of yesterday or yesteryear is no longer, which also affirms, the dangers of rape culture, is at odds with the rising, more exotic, more generated sexual liberation of sort of the LGBT community, which emphasizes sexual gratification basically at the expense of all else, unmoored from any sort of social taboos. And yeah, that's kind of where we're at now. So this impetus ends up inevitably pushing us onto the next thing, which becomes crazier and crazier and crazier. So in a nutshell, that's why nobody talks about rape culture anymore, is because the elevation of sexual gratification at the expense of all other aspects, coupled with the quest for racial justice, minimize and sort of the overlooked problems with mass migration and diversity in terms of sexual dynamics between men and women, ended up being the very thing that killed discourse around rape culture. And you're left with a very strange situation now where the TERFs, trans exclusionary, radical feminists are, left by the wayside and left behind by the current woke movement, and discussions about, and you end up having this weird situation where certain feminists are actually re-engineering, traditional sexual mores and then acting like, they discovered fire or something. So that's about it. That's all I wanted today. I'm not going to go super long today, but this was a topic which sort of came to my mind driving home from work on Friday. And I thought I'd make a video about it, sort of how this idea of rape culture ended up being, nuked from orbit by its own presuppositions. So we're going to go through the chat right now. If there's any super chats, I will answer those, of course, first. But if there aren't any, I'll go through here. Cape Rolcher, yes, I'm a Cape supremacist when it comes to South Africa. Hola, handmade Leah. Hola. Hallo. Goedemiddag. Good afternoon in Afrikaans. Ortilia aficionado, happened to me in high school, by the way. Girl regretted sleeping with me and told a guy. He came to threaten to tell the whole school. Thankfully, it led to nothing. Yeah, I know of people in my own life who basically this happened to, including when I was in university when this was really hot at the time. And yeah, it's a scary thing. In 2015, that was a little after my situation that I was familiar with, but yep, fits the time frame. You're the gap once and a while still. Yeah, but really I think anyone who's aware of where the energy for the culture war is, it is not with the feminists. It is not with rape culture. It's not with patriarchy. It's with racial justice and LGBT. Those are the big, and specifically the T, right? And sexual liberation at all costs. Cologne sexual assaults happened, then they changed their tune. I wonder why. Yeah, that's sort of what I was talking about. The issue with the alt-right 1.0 sort of stepping into the gaps and, actually being the feminists. Me Too movement needs a mention. Harvey Weinstein. Yep, and this is all tied to the rape culture stuff. Potentially weak, but also strong. Who could have predicted that religious fanatics would not agree with feminism? Yeah. But the thing is, the problem and why I don't have as much faith in the Mohammedan as maybe some on the DR do is the fact that within a couple of generations, 1 to 2 generations tops, these communities become shit libs just like everybody else. So it's not that Mohammedanism is based vis-a-vis Christianity. It's simply that Mohammedanism has not had the contact and proximity to these cultural viruses that Christendom has had. That's basically what's happening here. So anyways, as R.N. McIntyre says, they'll hollow out your religion and wear it as a skin suit. And they'll do this with literally everything. So nothing is unable to be subverted. So the truth faith will persist. Obviously, Christ said the gates of hell shall not prevail against the church. That is true. But for those who do kind of bend the knee or value their security above the truth, yeah, they will succumb, regardless of their faith tradition, by the way. This is what things lead to when weak men get weak and the women vote. Push the boulder rolling down the hill. Yeah. Buyer's remorse is dead. Yeah. But Mr. Patriarch, your opinion is invalid because you obviously hate women. Yes. I hate women so much. I married one and provide for her financially and let her look after the kids. Yes. Which is exactly what she wants, but it's only because I've psyoped her into accepting my patriarchal frame. Very sneaky of me. Feel like the revolution is moving to pass. Population cannot keep up with the issues. It's like a headless chicken. This is something that Academic Agent brings up, by the way. There's sort of a debate going on between him and R.N. McIntyre. Academic Agent says that the regime will try to put the woke away for the sake of maintaining power, right? Now, if they were smart, that's absolutely what they should do. But R.N. makes the point, and I think he's onto something, that the regime is too invested and possessed of their own ideology that they can't totally back away from, the woke, essentially. So, and this was also a disagreement between Paul Gottfried and Sam Francis. Sam Francis thought it was all sort of mechanical, all Machiavellian. And, they'll just do whatever they need to sort of stay in power. And Paul Gottfried was like, kind of, except the problem is that these people actually do believe their nonsense. This is actually the religion of the regime, and it does have power. And I am more sympathetic to that perspective than the purely mechanical, purely Machiavellian one. Yes, Machiavellian sort of power struggles and whatever do have a role to play. Yes, they're very important. However, for the elites of our society, I think they actually do believe their own bullshit, which is what makes them so dangerous and also what explains the collapse of nation states and civilizations, right? Because, if you just think about it, if the regime really was Machiavellian and it was all about power, they would be doing things to minimize, even if you look historically, right? They would be doing things to sort of assure stability and serenity within the realm and try to propagate, do what's best for the people, because then they'll be happy with the government and then the government will protect them and they'll have legitimacy within the public eye. But if you look historically and now, a lot of regimes don't actually do that. So you end up having nationalistic chauvinism within empires, which alienates subgroups, which then ends up leading to the disintegration of the empire. You also have decadence and whatever. And no, I think ideas and beliefs are actually vitally important, and they're real factors which work in parallel with the Machiavellianism. So it's not either or. Reject the dialectic. It's both and, right? That would be my position. Mr. Patriarch, your opinion is valid because you had all. Oh, sorry, did that one. Yep. I have no evidence, but I think it's because Troons are doing most of the R right. Doing most of the R right now. So they have to stop looking at R culture. Yeah. No, and that's something which, again, I kind of hinted at a little bit earlier. So Troons do R, and so do, certain minority groups from abroad. And this causes a tension within the narrative, which simply has to be overlooked. So the R culture ends up being sidestepped. Lacey Green has a podcast from Philip Daniel called Indirect Message, where she tries to be an open-ended centrist interviewer. Yeah. And that's really the only position for these feminists of yesteryear, right? Their only pivot is to sort of be the open-minded centrist. They become James Lindsay, essentially. Anything women don't like is hate. I don't know if I go that far. So Islam is getting paused like the rest of us. Yep. At least insofar as it has high degrees of contact with current Western culture, that's absolutely the case. And the demographics and political affiliation bear that out. To a certain extent, you could say that Islam actually, or immigrants from Islamist countries, this is true of a lot of minorities, by the way, including East Asians, actually do a very good job of assimilating to Western cultures and values. The problem is Western cultures and values are, from the top, are dog shit and anti-civilizational and are predicated on racial grievance. So insofar as that's elite opinion, immigrants actually do a very good job of assimilating to this. So, yeah, and that's not to say, it's all blank slate. Everybody can, become whatever, but it is highlighting the fact that the elite opinions of what now constitute the West seem to be readily adopted by minority groups. And I was, some time ago, I was listening to a talk by a Native American woman. I can't remember what sort of her tribal affiliation was. It was like Navajo or something. And basically, she sounded exactly like a white progressive, but with these, vestigial Native American beliefs, which ended up being pigeonholed and forced to conform to her progressive priors, right? So she's not really living the Navajo religion. She's not embodying it. What she's doing is she's taking racial grievances with a pastiche of Navajo spirituality and shoehorning it into her real religion, which is progressivism. Many such cases. Sergey Lewis, they don't need to subvert masculinity patriarchy via false allegations. They instead just do it through gender transition. Interesting. From Hello, Technocratic Industrial Complex knows when it's too much and will have to back off before it jeopardizes its own power. Many people have said this, even Uncle Ted. Yeah, but I don't know if they can, is the thing. And this is sort of where I'm sympathetic to Auron. I don't think they can reel this back in because on some level, they actually believe it. When you'll deal with chaos, control even of your own machinations tends to decline. Absolutely. Sweden knows. Yep, they know. Yep, basically true. So anyways, that's all I got for today. Thank you very much, guys. And again, if you want to support the channel, links to Subscribestar and PayPal can be found in the comments below this video. Any and all support is appreciated. For as little as $2 a month, you too can be a Giga Chad and support me with your super fats. Yeah, that's good. Appreciate you guys. Thank you very much for tuning in. We had a good crowd today. And I really like doing these. And quick tip, next week, I did have a live stream planned with Brother Augustine for next Sunday. We still might do it at that time, but it will not be a live stream. He has some personal issues which may demand his attention. So we're going to be doing a pre-recorded, which will then be released to the general public once it's completed. So unfortunately, I can't, or he can't, due to his circumstances, commit to a specific time. So we will not be doing a live stream. Again, Brother Augustine's book, Fascism Viewed from the Cross, will be pre-recorded and then released sometime next week. Very excited for that. I'm about 50 pages into his book right now. It's very good, very interesting. And if you guys have any specific that's good. If you guys have any specific questions that you would like me to ask Brother Augustine, aka Michael Woodcoff, I will post a community. I'll make a community post, and then I want you guys to leave your comments there so I can ask him stuff. Thank you very much, guys. Have a blessed Monday. Have a fruitful week, and I'll talk to you next time. Patriarch out.